Guys, so right off the top, I should note that Brandon and I share office space together at the Christian Post. Although I'm rarely there. You're there a lot more than I am. I'm there about 3 days a month or every 6 weeks or whatever. And Dr. Jeff, I should note that you were my guest on episode 18 of the Crossmap Podcast. So you were the first person making a return visit to the program.
Ago.
Just about 1 year. We talked in March of 2022, and then the episode aired at the end of April, early May that year. So there you go. So you're my second, twice guest. So congratulations on that.
Wow, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is great.
So seriously, why we're here today is that the two of you have co-authored a brand new book called Exposing the Gender Lie: How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. There's a lot in there, but there's a lot to unpack with this issue. So if you're trying to encourage a friend or a family member to pick up this book and read it, what would you say to encourage them? I mean, what would your sales pitch be on that?
This is one of the biggest issues of our day. We think in some of the schools that we've visited, a third of the young people claim a transgender identity. The idea that we are male or female has very little bearing if you believe that you are your own truth and that biological reality does not matter as much as how you feel about yourself. Now, the reason this has become a huge issue, and it has been huge on TikTok, the hashtag trans has had more than 50 billion views. And it is now one of the dominant identities that young adults claim. But the reason it's a problem is because it's tapped into an ideology that says there's no such thing as truth, and that confusion about things that we would relate to truth, such as male or female, need to be abolished. And then there's an industry coming in behind it saying, well, if you identify as trans, we can fix you using our medicine. And you've got the medical industrial complex essentially targeting to make billions of dollars off of gender insecure people.
So based on that, from a sky-high level, why has transgender ideology just taken the world by storm over the last decade?
The reason that it has taken the world by storm is because it's top-down social engineering. This is not a grassroots organic movement. There are truly evil, wicked men and women in high places who have set this scheme, this child abuse scourge, this medical horror in all of the tops of the institutions. Throughout all of culture, especially throughout the medical arena, in the hospitals and the universities, throughout our government, and in popular culture, this ideology that you can somehow be born in the wrong body, that if you'd like to identify as the opposite sex, medicalization, hormones, and surgery can help you get there. Of course, it's all a lie, but we, as it says in the subtitle of our book, Exposing the Transgender Industry's False Ideology, we wanted to make that very clear, that this is an industrial, money-making pursuit. There are people who have set this in motion where it's not about truly helping the very small portion of the population that may have some sort of incongruence, psychological distress about their sex. This has been a social contagion, aided and abetted by social media and peer influence, and it's just been like gasoline on the fire. So we certainly have compassion for those who are genuinely struggling. We want to make that clear, and we're not mental health clinicians to give any sort of professional advice, but this has been set in motion by some very evil people who want to seek to profit off of the distress of a generation who's already struggling.
Wow.
I think that's such an important point. That'd be worth just winding it back and listening to that again, because the way Brandon summarized it is crucial. This is not about gender insecure people. There are a lot of insecure people. There are a lot of insecure people who are teenagers. It's very normal for a teenager to feel uncomfortable in their body. What's new is that we've got an ideology and an industry saying to these young people, we know what your core problem is, and we have the solution if you will buy our medicine.
I read a fair amount on this issue and this topic, and I don't know where I saw this statistic. I think I've mentioned this to you before, Brandon, but what gets me is that I think the number is 9%, only 9% of the US population supports the transgender agenda, yet they are essentially driving the bus on this. How can this be?
The reason for that is because they have captured the media. The media is the protective phalanx around the medical institutions that are committing these medical atrocities. And I don't think that's putting it too strongly. I don't believe that this medical scourge would be happening but for the protection that has been provided to them by gender ideologues who call themselves journalists. The press has gaslit the public and made them believe things that are objectively false, not least of which is the euphemism gender-affirming care, or even the word transgender. There is no such thing, materially speaking. We are only ever always male or female. And so because they've hijacked our language and they've manipulated perceptions, they've warped the way we think by altering our very means of communication to make people believe things that are just false. Most people don't believe it, but they really don't know what has been going on because the media has been parroting this dogma through their own version of Orwellian newspeak. And so they've got the public in a psychological straitjacket of deceit.
I may be oversimplifying this, but I do feel like I paid attention in biology class, and you just mentioned this in your comments. When I say that humans are mammals, they are born male or they are born female. There's no in between or make it up along the fly. So with that said, why are people distorting a scientific truth with this craziness and deviating away from that? Why is that happening? It's probably based on what you just said. The media's grabbed it.
That's a big part of it. I believe that, as a Christian, certainly I've often said that when we think of the backdrop for how we look at the world, certainly at the Christian Post, the lens through which we see all of our affairs is Ephesians 6. We're in a cosmic struggle between good and evil. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. And an attack of the enemy on the image of God as male and female, he always attacks the body. He doesn't have a body. We as human beings are embodied persons made in God's image, and so he wages war with ferocious rage against our maleness and our femaleness. So that can't be ignored. But again, I would just reiterate, as Jesus said, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Well, if you're not making money through an ethical means, you're trying to profit off of medically exploiting someone to make them believe that they can somehow become the opposite sex by way of cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers or a body disfiguring surgery. You can profit very handsomely, and the most visible example of this, she out and out said it, Matt Walsh and his crew down at the Daily Wire exposed Vanderbilt, where a doctor actually said on tape that this is a great moneymaker for our hospital. So even the gender clinicians themselves are admitting it. But you combine the love of money, the lust for money, you couple that with spiritual evil, you've got sort of a witch's brew of horror.
Most vulnerable to transgender ideology are children and teenagers. They're being told to deny reality, it's okay to make this irreversible and damaging change to your body. How can the medical community allow this, knowing that what is done can't be changed?
There are a lot of doctors, obviously, who don't support transgender medicine. But doctors rely on what are called standards of care because they don't know everything about everything. Those standards of care, if your patient is experiencing this, here's what we have found to be the best treatment process. So a doctor who might not be thinking about it that much would probably not be aware that the WPATH, the standards of care for transgender health, were designed by activists, a very tiny group of activists, who were brought into the medical community from LGBTQ lobbying organizations to form out what they thought would be the best standards of care. It wasn't medical doctors, and certainly in the case of the American pediatric community, we think that probably fewer than 30 people had any hand in developing the transgender standards of care out of more than 60,000 doctors who are members of that association.
The academic medicine types, are the ones really pushing this. Your average doctor who just wants to practice medicine, take care of patients, many of them are just not informed as to what the literature's saying, and they're just doing their jobs and they're not even aware. But you have entrenched ideologues in certain communities, and they set the terms, they're the ones who speak to the media, and they shape the discourse in favor of their ideological aims.
Right. So when talking about kids and teenagers, what are some practical ways that people can equip their child with the truth about their God-given gender, and how can they show their kids to expose the lies that come from this ideology?
Well, the first thing I would say would be God-given sex, not God-given gender. One of the things that I implore parents to say, no, but here, this is actually a very crucial point, because most people, I still hear it, people use the word sex and gender interchangeably. Children need to understand that with the incursion of gender ideology in our society, the sex is always the target. Gender didn't even have a medicalized connotation prior to about the 60s. It wasn't even a medical word. It was linguistic. Well, gender activists, transgender activists will say, I'm not changing my sex, I'm changing my gender. Well, then why are you changing, why are you trying to cut off sex organs?
True.
And so the linguistic and the manipulation games that transgender activists play with the word gender, when people hear you can't change your gender, they need to be, the issue needs to be forced that no, it's actually sex that's the target here. Help children understand that there are people who, when you say gender, what they really mean is sex. And it's very confusing. The confusion is precisely the point. So children need to know that, yes, God gave them a sex. It's stamped in their DNA, male and female. It's not just a biological thing, it's a spiritual thing. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, according to Psalm 139, but that there is absolutely nothing wrong with their bodies. No one has ever been or ever will be born in the wrong one. This is a neo-Gnostic idea. So introduce the theology. Talk about that this isn't just scientific, but this is actually, there's a fundamental integrity here to your earth suit. Your physical frame has an inherent dignity to it, and that's why you don't desecrate it. And you talk to them about biomedical ethics. You can talk about why it's important to take care of your bodies and why there are certain things about them that you simply cannot and will not ever be able to change. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The theistic religions, so we're talking about Judaism, Islam, and then Christianity, both Protestantism and Catholicism, all go back to the same source, that human beings are made in God's image. That's the first thing we know about people. The second thing we know about people from Genesis chapter 1 is that God made them male and female. The theology and the biology intertwine together. So that's, I think, a really important thing for parents to talk with their children about. And also to ask questions like, have you ever felt like you didn't really relate to people who were male or female? Yes, most children have had that kind of an experience. Why? Because they somehow assume that the stereotypes that are presented in culture are absolute. Why would they assume that the stereotypes are absolute? Because there's a fatal, unproven, false assumption that is at the root of gender ideology, and that's the gender spectrum. The idea that extreme masculinity is over here, extreme femininity is over here, and every person with a male body or a female body is somewhere on that spectrum. Okay? It's not a biological fact. In fact, it's a biological lie. But you have so many young people who are confused. We had one young woman who was studying in a technical field, and all of the young people at her school would say, you don't really enjoy girly things. Maybe you're actually a boy born in the wrong body. And she was able to share with us, if it hadn't been for the training I had received about the value of male and female, I might be transgender, because that pressure is so incredibly strong.
This is a very regressive set of sex stereotypes. I work a lot with radical feminists who find it so insulting that if you say a woman, because she likes a certain thing, that means she might be a man. I mean, what more of an insult? It actually rigidly enshrines the various stereotypes that a wave of feminists fought so hard against. And so this is a negation of everything that they tried to resist. I mean, if a woman is more of a tomboy, or a girl's more of a tomboy, or a boy prefers the arts, God bless. That doesn't undercut their maleness or femaleness. It's who God made them to be. And bless God for that. Should celebrate that.
Yeah, for sure. What I so appreciate about the two of you is that you're not afraid to stand in that gap, and expose everything that's happened in the past, everything that's happening right now, and what potentially could happen going forward. So that brings me to my question, and I think it's a pretty blatantly obvious one, but why is right now the right time for this book to be published and out and available for people?
My view about why it's the right time is I wish it would have been last year. I mean, I think one child is one too many to be mutilated and sterilized. So, but I think now is the timing is quite fortuitous in that we are finally seeing an awakening, at least among, I think it's up to 18 states now that have passed some sort of a law to say that the medicalization has to be restricted for minors. I mean, frankly, I don't think this is ethical to do to any human person because it's predicated on a lie about the human body. But we really do need to protect children. The idea that a child, prepubescent, can consent to drugs that will render them sterile is appalling. It's been documented in JAMA Pediatrics, the medical journal, that girls as young as 13 have had their breasts surgically removed. Boys as young as 15 and 16 have had their genitals amputated. The horrors
cringe as you say these things.
And they make fake vaginas out of intestine. I mean, the medical experimentation is absolutely atrocious. It would make Dr. Mengele blush. So now's the time because there is an awakening of the masses about the extent of the harm. People can't just ignore this or say that's just a few people on the margins of society. An entire generation has been captured by this insane dogma, and the medical carnage is piling up to the point where I think it's unignorable now. It needs to stop as soon as possible. This is a desecration of the human body, and it's one of the worst forms of child abuse that the world has ever seen.
And Chris, at Summit Ministries, we're focused on preparing a rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. The operative word there is truth. So what we're seeing, and the reason we got involved in this is not because we were just trying to pick a fight. When we talk to this rising generation, confused about sex and confused about this question about gender, and aren't there 68 different genders and all of these kinds of things, we realize that at the core of it is an actual attack on reality itself. So we had to engage in order to prepare this rising generation to be able to access the truth.
Just a couple more questions for you. The first is, how can people of faith be best praying for this issue? I mean, prayer is so powerful, as we all know. So what are some things that people can specifically pinpoint and lift up to God?
I think one of the main things that people need to know is that they can be confident that if you don't budge on Genesis 1, well, first, you can't get Genesis 1 wrong without getting the whole gospel wrong.
That's true.
You can't, this is not agree to disagree territory among denominations where there's little differences. No, if we get this wrong, the gospel has zero meaning. But stand in the truth, the words of the Apostle Paul. It's been a life verse for me as I've been engaging this journalistically in 2 Corinthians, that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal but mighty through God for the tearing down and destruction of strongholds. Gender ideology is an ugly, vicious, pernicious stronghold, but it's no match for the blood of the Lamb. The blood of Jesus has never lost its power, and it never will. And so just get on your knees and believe in faith that the confidence that we can have in God, that if we ask for anything that is according to his will, we know that he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, we know that we have for what we've asked in him. That's 1 John 5. Just stand on the word of God and believe and cry out to God that he would deliver supernaturally and sovereignly, that this evil would be crushed by his mighty hand, that the wicked people in the tops of our institutions that are perpetuating this abuse would be dethroned. Get bold, get loud, and gather people together. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there he is. Amen. Also. Just believe with radical faith that he does not stand for this, because he doesn't. Jesus doesn't take too kindly when you hurt children. If you invest in stocks, I'd say the millstone market's going to be pretty good. But just know that if God is for you, who can be against you? And we must stand for truth and fight for our children on our knees in prayer.
Amen.
I think standing for children is at the heart of this as well. We're always praying for the rising generation because they are 15% of the population. They are 100% of the future. So our prayers for them include helping that they would be able to see that they're made in God's image. They'd be able to see the beauty of being male or female, that maleness and femaleness are part of our created design to harmonize with one another. You were not born in the wrong body. And then to also act on our prayer by seeking help for young adults. When Brandon and I started comparing notes about the young people that we've met, talked to, worked with, who are experiencing gender dysphoria, we realized that they all have some sort of, it's a psychological comorbidity that goes along with anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation and even sometimes addictions. But very often, and I'm not saying this as a counselor, I'm just saying this as a guy who's worked with thousands of young people, very often there's some kind of a childhood trauma that is unresolved. So we don't want to make fun of or isolate people who are gender insecure. Rather, we want to see if there's some unresolved thing that if we were to deal with it, could help restore them to health and wholeness. When young people are restored to health and wholeness, 75 to 90% of gender insecure people resolve their understanding of their gender identity with their biological sex.
That's good. Final question for you both, and that is, after people have read Exposing the Gender Lie, what would you like to see folks get out of the reading experience? I mean, what's your greatest hope for this book?
My greatest hope is that they would be moved to go deeper and offer the world an alternative. We resist this toxic, evil ideology because the alternative is unthinkable. But the truth, and we articulate this in the 5th chapter of our book, is that we have a much better capital S story to tell. There is a redemptive alternative for the gender madness that ails us. There's a biblical vision. It's a beautiful vision for what it means to be male and female. Let's dig deep into that, and that would be something that we give away to the world and pass on to the next generation. I think it's what people are crying out for. I hope that they can, sort of really understand. I hope that by reading our book, they understand the times. They have the spirit of the sons of Issachar, that they would discern the times and know what to do about it. That as they read, they would be equipped with the knowledge about, okay, this makes sense now. This propels me to some sort of action. And I don't care what people do. Just pray about what the Holy Spirit would have you do, and then just do it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Chris, you know what the number one most repeated command in Scripture is? Do not fear. We want people to gain the courage to understand, I can understand where this ideology came from. I can stand for children who are being targeted by people who want to make money off of their insecurity. And I can stand for the truth. The truth is on your side on this issue, as difficult as it does seem to be sometimes to communicate it.
Brandon Showalter, Dr. Jeff Myers, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.